She stood at the gate with a dress too thin for the wind and eyes too wide for her years. "Please don't leave me like Mama did," she whispered. The couple had buried their only child last winter. They opened the door. The wind blew harder that evening, curling through the picket fence and setting the porch lantern to swinging, but neither Amos nor Ruth Whitlock moved from their chairs. They sat in stillness, she with her knitting untouched in her lap, he with his gaze fixed on the horizon as if expecting something more than stars. It was Ruth who saw her first, a small figure standing just beyond the fence, as if afraid to step closer, or as if one more step might break her completely. Amos noticed the silence before he noticed the girl. No crickets, no wind though the lantern still swayed, just that awful hush that always came right before a memory tried to come back to life. When he turned, his breath caught low in his chest. She couldn't have been more than 7, maybe 8, but thin in a way that made age hard to guess. Her dress was a faded blue, torn near the hem, her boots caked in dry mud and splitting at the toes. A single braid hung over one shoulder, dark hair streaked with the dust of the road. But it was her eyes that made Ruth rise without thinking, wide, silent, and tired in a way no child should be. Ruth stepped off the porch before Amos could speak. "You lost, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice careful, as if too much kindness might scare the girl off. The child blinked, then stepped forward, not timidly, not brave either, just decided. Her voice cracked like old wood when she spoke. "Please don't leave me like Mama did." Ruth knelt instantly. "Oh, honey." She looked over her shoulder at Amos, but he was already rising from the chair, slow like the weight of his bones had just tripled. The girl didn't cry, not then. She just stood there like something left behind by a storm, a thing the wind forgot to finish off. "What's your name, child?" Amos asked when he joined them at the gate. "Willa," she answered, "Willa James." Ruth didn't ask about her mother. Not yet. The answer was already in the girl's hands, which trembled when she reached up to rub at her eyes, and in the way she clutched a frayed canvas satchel to her side like it was the last thing she owned. "Come on," Ruth said, standing and reaching for her hand. "It's cold. You'll catch your death if you stand out here any longer." Amos opened the gate. Willa walked through without being led. Inside the house, everything smelled faintly of pine and old cloth. The fire had been low before, just enough to chase off the chill, but Amos stoked it higher now. Ruth brought Willa a blanket, soft, though faded with years, and a cup of warm milk with a pinch of honey stirred in. The girl took it without a word, sitting near the hearth and holding the cup with both hands, as if afraid it might vanish if she let go. Amos watched her from the doorway. "Where'd you come from, Willa?" She didn't answer right away. Ruth touched his arm gently. "Let her be for now." But Willa looked up after a moment, her voice quieter than the wind now. "Mama told me to run. She said if I heard men's voices, to run and not stop. I waited near the river like she told me, but she never came." Amos closed his eyes. "Was it just you and her?" Ruth asked. Willa nodded. "We moved a lot. I think we were looking for someone. She had a name in her pocket, a man's name. I think he was supposed to help us, but she said we were too late." Her brow furrowed, as if trying to remember something that hurt too much to recall fully. "She said this place was kind. She said people here remembered what it meant to be good." Neither Ruth nor Amos spoke for a long time. Later, after Willa had dozed off in the rocking chair, the blanket wrapped around her like a cocoon, Amos stood by the window and looked out across the yard. The stars were bright now, cold and quiet. "She doesn't know she's alone yet," he said. "She will," Ruth whispered from behind him. "And when she does, it'll be the second time she's lost everything. Maybe we can stop it there." Amos turned slowly. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "I'm thinking the Lord don't put children in our path by accident." He said nothing to that, just stared down at the floor where Willa's little satchel sat leaning against the chair. A single strap threadbare, a patch of faded embroidery in the shape of a bird. Amos walked over, knelt beside it, and opened the flap gently. Inside were 3 items: a comb with most of its teeth missing, a torn piece of paper with a name written in elegant script, Jonah Price, and a small leather Bible so worn its spine had gone soft. He handed the paper to Ruth. "You recognize the name?" She shook her head. "But maybe the pastor might, or the postmaster. Folks around here remember names even if they don't like talking about 'em." Willa stirred in her sleep. Her face crumpled for a moment like she might cry, but the tears didn't come. She just curled tighter. Amos sighed, deep and heavy, the way he had that morning they buried their son beneath the lone cottonwood tree. "We lost ours," he said quietly. "Maybe the Lord's given us someone else to care for." "She's not a replacement, Amos." "I know," he looked toward the girl, "but maybe she's a reason." By morning, Willa was already awake. She sat at the kitchen table, her legs swinging just short of the floor, a slice of cornbread in one hand and a look of practiced quiet in her eyes. "You sleep all right?" Ruth asked as she poured fresh water into the basin. Willa nodded. "Thank you for the blanket." "Of course." Ruth placed a plate of scrambled eggs beside her. "Eat as much as you want, you're not a bother." Willa looked down quickly, as if the words stung more than soothed. "Mama used to say that too, when we had food." The air went still for a beat, but Amos broke it by stepping in from outside, his coat dusted with frost. "Going to town later. You want to come, Willa?" She blinked. "Why?" He shrugged. "See the place. Maybe help me carry some flour. Ruth'll be here if you'd rather stay." Willa hesitated, then nodded. "I'll go." The trip into town was quiet. Amos didn't say much and Willa didn't offer much. But he noticed the way her eyes took in every detail: the worn signs, the cracked windows, the horses tied up outside the general store. She didn't ask for anything. Not candy, not toys. Just stood close to him, her fingers occasionally brushing his coat sleeve like a child not quite sure she had permission to hold on. When they reached the post office, Amos handed over the note with Jonah Price written on it. The clerk squinted. "Ain't heard that name in a long while." "Dead?" Amos asked. The man shook his head. "Left. Long before the war, had family trouble, maybe some debts. Heard he was headed west, maybe Arizona territory." Willa's face didn't change. She just stood there. Amos folded the paper again. "Thanks." They were halfway home when Willa finally spoke again. "You don't have to keep me. I can go if it's too much." Amos pulled the wagon to a stop. "Where would you go?" She shrugged, but it was hollow. "Mama always found somewhere." "You're not your mama, Willa, and this ain't a stop on the road, it's a home." She stared at him, uncertain. "What if you change your mind?" Amos looked out over the fields, then down at her. "I buried my only son last winter. Hadn't prayed for anything since, but you showed up at our gate and made me hope again. That ain't something I give up on easy." She didn't cry, not yet, but her hand reached for his then, and this time she didn't let go. Back at the house, Ruth was waiting on the porch. She waved as they came up the path, and Willa did something she hadn't done since she arrived. She waved back. The days that followed settled into a kind of quiet rhythm, the sort that made you forget how recently things had been broken. Willa didn't ask for much. She swept without being told, folded her own blanket in the morning, and never left a crumb behind on her plate. Ruth noticed it all, though she said nothing. The girl moved like someone always preparing to be told to leave. She never set her shoes by the door, never hung her shawl on the peg. Everything she owned, those few worn things, stayed tucked inside that satchel by the hearth, as if she needed to be ready to run at a moment's notice. Ruth tried to reach her slowly, gently. She didn't pry or force conversation. Instead, she offered small things: a ribbon found in an old drawer, a carved button to replace one Willa had lost, a story before bed about her own girlhood, when the world had been smaller and gentler. Willa listened, always polite, always still, but there was something locked behind her eyes that hadn't melted yet. One night, Ruth came in from gathering eggs to find Willa standing by the cottonwood, the same one where their son, Isaac, lay buried beneath a flat stone marked only by a cross and his name. Willa didn't move when Ruth approached. "You knew him?" the girl asked without turning. "I knew him every day of his life," Ruth said softly. Willa was quiet for a moment. "I never knew mine." The wind stirred the tall grass. Ruth stepped closer, her voice barely more than a breath. "He was about your age when he took to drawing horses on every scrap of paper he could find. Said he wanted to break wild ones someday." "What happened to him?" Ruth hesitated, the ache in her chest returning like it always did when she spoke of Isaac. "Fever. Came fast. Burned through him in 2 days. We buried him right here because he loved this tree more than anything. Said it was his guardian." Willa looked up at the branches, sparse now with fall nearly done. "Does it guard you too?" Ruth blinked, then smiled through tears she didn't let fall. "I think it does." That night Ruth found a small square of paper left on her pillow. A sketch, rough, clumsy, but unmistakable. It was the cottonwood tree, drawn in pencil. Underneath it, a tiny figure stood holding a ribbon. Meanwhile, Amos had taken to walking Willa through morning chores. He showed her how to check the henhouse without startling the birds, how to test the garden soil, and how to split kindling without wasting strength. She was a quick learner, too quick almost, like a child who feared mistakes were dangerous. Amos didn't push her, but he watched. "Don't have to prove anything here," he said once as she struggled to stack a basket of squash that was clearly too heavy. "Ain't nobody measuring you." Willa didn't meet his eyes. "People always measure you, even when they say they don't." Amos looked at her a long time before reaching down and lifting the basket himself. "Well, I ain't people," he said. "I'm just Amos." She didn't smile, but something in her shoulders eased. It was near the end of that week, when trouble first showed its shadow. They'd gone into town again for supplies, this time with Willa in a clean dress Ruth had adjusted to fit. At the general store, folks noticed. It wasn't every day a child showed up with the Whitlocks, not since Isaac. Some nodded kindly. Others whispered just low enough not to be heard clearly, but their glances lingered too long. One man, thin and bent with age, narrowed his eyes at Willa. "Don't look nothing like you," he muttered as Amos passed. Amos didn't respond, but he noted the man's name, George Petty, and the way he lingered too long near the back of the store. On the ride home, Willa sat quiet again, her fingers plucked at the hem of her sleeve. Finally, she said, "Do people not like me?" Amos sighed. "They don't know you, and people don't like what they don't understand." "Well, they make me leave." "No, they won't." "But if they come and ask?" "I said no, Willa." She stared at him, surprised at the firmness in his voice. But instead of fear, there was something else in her gaze, like she was trying to believe him but didn't know how. That night after supper, Ruth noticed the door wasn't fully latched. She pushed it closed, but not before glancing out into the night and seeing a figure just beyond the barn, watching. The shape vanished when she stepped onto the porch. Amos came out moments later, shotgun already in his hand. "I saw him," Ruth said before he could ask. "Petty," Amos muttered, "or one of his." They didn't wake Willa. Instead, they took turns sitting by the window that night, the shotgun leaning near the table. The next day, Amos rode to speak with the sheriff, a man named Kellen Hart. They served together during the war, Amos a quartermaster, Kellen a scout. Hard men made harder by what they'd seen, but Kellen had a heart buried under all that dust, and Amos knew it. "She a runaway?" Kellen asked after hearing the story. "From what I couldn't say, her mom is gone, told her to run. The girl came straight to us." Kellen nodded slowly. "Petty's been talking. Claims a bounty's out west for a woman and her child. Says he saw flyers." "Doesn't mean it's her." "No, but rumors spread like prairie fire. And the wrong man hears about a child without kin. He might try and claim her for coin. Amos stiffened. She's not for sale. Didn't say she was. Kellen leaned back. But if there's a bounty, someone might come looking. Amos left with his jaw clenched and his hands white on the reins. When he got home, Willa was drawing in the dirt by the barn with a stick, her brow furrowed in concentration. A horse. Not wild this time, but still proud, still standing tall. "You're good at that," he said. She shrugged. "Mama said it's a waste unless someone sees it." "I see it." She looked up at him, and this time a smile cracked the edge of her mouth, small, unsure, but real. That night, after Willa fell asleep, Amos and Ruth sat by the fire. The paper with Jonah Price's name lay between them. "She's still got family out there," Amos said. "Maybe. Or maybe just ghosts." He nodded. "If someone comes, we need to be ready." "Would you give her up?" Ruth asked, her voice almost breaking. Amos stared into the fire. "If it was for her good, maybe, but I don't think running again would be good for her." Ruth reached across the table and took his hand. "Then we don't let her run. Not again." But the peace wouldn't last. The next morning a letter came by Ryder, unmarked. No return, just a single sheet inside, folded once and tucked under the porch rail. "She belongs to me. I'm coming for her." No name, no signature. Amos burned the letter in the stove. Willa saw the smoke and asked nothing, but that night she locked her satchel under the bed. And she slept with her shoes on. The next week unfolded like a breath held too long, every day tight, every shadow suspicious. Willa sensed the tension, though no one spoke of it. She kept her voice soft, her steps lighter, and stayed within sight of the house, never venturing beyond the fence without asking. Amos began checking the windows twice each night and installed a second bolt on the front door. Ruth started keeping the lantern lit till morning, its warm glow flickering through the parlor long after the fire died down. They told Willa nothing, but children like her didn't need to be told. They'd already learned what danger looked like in the twitch of a jaw, the delay of an answer, the way two grown people whispered when they thought you were asleep. And Willa had seen enough of those signs to know someone was coming. She just didn't know if they were coming for her, or if she was simply the reason danger followed. On the fifth morning, Amos saddled the mare and hitched the wagon with more urgency than usual. Willa stood barefoot on the porch, arms wrapped around her ribs, watching him secure the tarp over the feed sacks. "You leaving?" she asked, though the question came out more like a whisper. He turned. "Just to town, won't be gone long." "Can I come?" He hesitated. "Not today." Willa's face didn't crumple, it didn't fall. It simply emptied, like something inside her had braced for the answer already. "I'll be back before sun's down," he said gently. She nodded once, then went inside without another word. Ruth found her later by the hearth, sitting cross-legged with the little leather Bible open on her lap, tracing her fingers over the words, though she didn't seem to be reading them. "You all right, love?" Ruth asked, crouching beside her. Willa shrugged. Amos left. "He'll be back." Willa nodded again, but her voice dropped. "So did Mama, once, and then she didn't." Ruth reached out, smoothing a hand over the girl's braid. "Amos isn't your mama. He keeps his word." Willa stared into the flames. "That's what makes it worse if it's not true." The fire cracked sharply. Ruth said nothing, because sometimes even the right words couldn't fix the ache left behind by too many broken promises. In town, Amos didn't go to the store or the post office. He headed straight for the far end of the road, past the saloon and livery, to a low-slung building with boarded windows and a lopsided sign, Rook's Claims and Loans. He tied the mare outside and stepped in. Inside, a man looked up from a ledger. He was thin, pale, with a scar over his left brow that pulled every expression sideways. His name was Denton Rook, and Amos had never liked him. "You got a problem, Whitlock?" Rook asked, not bothering to stand. Amos pulled a folded paper from his coat and set it on the counter. The letter. He hadn't burned the original, just said he had. Rook unfolded it, squinted, then set it down slowly. That your girl? No. Your kin? No. Rook smiled. Then why someone writing you about her? Because they think I'm a soft enough man to hand her over. Rook leaned back. And are you? Amos didn't answer. Instead, he placed a second paper on the counter, a handbill, weather-stained and creased, that Kellen had found tucked in an old post ledger. It showed a rough sketch of a woman's face. Beside her name was another, Willa. The date on the paper was over a year old. The reward listed was $80. I want to know who put this out, who wrote the letter, and I want to know what kind of men they are. Rook stroked his jaw. That sort of information costs. Amos pulled a cloth pouch from his coat, untied the string, and emptied 5 silver coins into his palm. He set them down one by one. That enough? Rook picked them up. It buys a name. Amos waited. Rook exhaled. Jasper Flynn, former Pinkerton, got dismissed for rough handling. Now he freelances. Tracks runaways, fetches lost property, claims bounties that ain't been taken down yet. Is the girl property? Rook looked up. To him, anything with a price is. Amos stared at the man for a long, hot second. Then he turned and left. Back at the homestead, the wind had picked up again. Ruth was hanging clothes on the line when she noticed the storm clouds curling low over the ridge. Willa sat nearby, watching the sky as if it were trying to tell her something. You think bad weather makes bad people stay away? She asked suddenly. Ruth looked over. Sometimes it slows them down. Willa nodded, thoughtful. Mama said the world punishes kindness, that the nicer you are, the worse it ends. Do you believe that? I don't want to. Ruth reached for the last damp shirt and pinned it carefully. Then don't. The world's cruel sometimes, but that don't mean we have to be. Willa looked down at her hands. I think you and Amos are the only people who didn't ask something from me first. Ruth turned fully to face her. What could we ask, Willa? The girl hesitated. To be someone I'm not, to not talk about Mama, to pretend like I'm just a guest, not a problem. You're not a problem, and this is your home. Willa's voice caught, for now. Ruth crossed the grass and knelt in front of her. Not for now, for as long as you need, and maybe longer than that. A tear slipped down Willa's cheek. I don't want to be afraid anymore. You don't have to be. Just then, thunder rolled across the hills. Ruth stood and scanned the tree line. A shape moved near the fence, too far to see clearly, too deliberate to be chance. Ruth stepped back, Willa inside now. The girl didn't ask why, she ran. Amos returned by sundown. The wind had begun tearing loose branches from the trees, and the clouds were heavy with more than just rain. They've found her, Ruth said the moment he stepped inside. He nodded, I know. You think they'll come in the storm? If they're the kind of men I think they are, they won't wait for it to pass. Willa stood behind the kitchen door, her face pale. Who is he? His name's Flynn, Amos said, and he thinks you're worth $80. I'm not worth anything, she whispered. Ruth knelt beside her, taking her face in both hands. You hear me now, you're not for sale, you never were. But Mama, she said, if things got bad enough. That's not gonna happen again, Amos said. You're not alone now. Ruth rose. What do we do? Amos looked out the window. We prepare. He and Ruth began moving through the house in quiet urgency. Lanterns filled. Extra logs brought in. The rifle checked and loaded. They blocked the back door with the old table and reinforced the front with 2 beams nailed crosswise. Willa stood near the hearth, her satchel in hand. You're not running, Amos said firmly. She didn't look at him. I was just checking it was still there. Ruth approached her and took the satchel gently, setting it aside. You don't need to run any more, Willa. A knock came just past midnight. Soft come. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Amos stood behind the door, gun in hand. Ruth stood behind Willa. A voice called through the wood. Mr. Whitlock, I don't mean trouble, just here on behalf of the rightful guardian of the girl. She has no guardian but God, Amos said. The voice chuckled. That's sweet, but paper says different. I've seen the paper, and I've seen the girl. I choose the girl. A silence. Then that's a poor choice, friend. Ruth's hand tightened on Willa's shoulder. Go to the back room, love, now. Willa obeyed. A moment later, a boot hit the door, then another. Then the sound of wood splintering. Amos stepped back and raised the gun. The storm outside raged as the door gave way. The door didn't break clean. The first board snapped loud, a splintered scream over the storm, but the crossbeam held. A second boot hit harder, followed by the crack of something heavier, a rifle stock maybe, or an axe. Dust trembled from the rafters. Willa huddled in the corner of the back room, arms wrapped around her knees, the little leather Bible pressed against her chest like a shield. She could hear Amos breathing steady, not panic, just prepared. She could hear Ruth whispering prayers under her breath, each word a stitch trying to hold the seams of the night together. Then the door gave way with a final crash. A man stepped through, tall and broad-shouldered, coat soaked through, hat low over his brow. Another followed behind him, thinner, twitchier. Neither of them looked like they belonged to the land. They didn't carry the wear of farmers or the hush of mountain men. They looked like dogs used to taking what wasn't theirs. Amos didn't lower the rifle. You Flynn? He asked. The bigger man smirked. That's me. And the rat behind you? Flynn glanced back. Partner of sorts, don't worry about him. We ain't here to hurt nobody, just looking to collect what's owed. She's not yours to collect. Flynn shrugged off his coat and let it drop to the floor, steam rising from his shoulders. Paper says otherwise. Her ma was under contract, signed and sealed with Judge Myron Beckett back in Texas territory. Man's got witnesses. Girl was promised property. She's a child. Didn't say she was, still property. Ain't my place to argue law. Then maybe it's time someone did. Flynn tilted his head. I know your type. Bible in one hand, shotgun in the other. Think the land owes you peace just cause you lost something. Let me tell you, nothing on this earth is fair. Your boy died, that's a shame. But this girl ain't yours to keep in his place. Amos's jaw tightened. Her name is Willa, and she is not for sale. Flynn stepped forward. You willing to kill over a girl you barely know? Amos didn't flinch. You willing to die trying to take her? For a moment, no one breathed. Then the thin man behind Flynn moved. Amos didn't shoot yet. He shifted just slightly, eyes locked on both of them. Flynn sighed. All right, I get it. Pride, guilt, maybe a little hope mixed in. You think holding this place makes you righteous, but she's got a price and folks down the trail will pay it. You take one more step, Amos said, and the price will be yours. Flynn stared at him, then laughed once. All right then. He turned. Amos blinked. You're walking away? He asked. For now, Flynn said, but this isn't over. I got no problem getting blood on my hands, but I don't like doing it for free. You made this harder than it needed to be, old man. Now it's going to cost. He stepped back into the storm. The second man lingered, glaring, but followed. Amos stayed frozen at the door, rifle still raised, heart thudding like a war drum. Ruth stepped up beside him, her hand light on his arm. They'll be back, she said. I know. Willa didn't sleep that night. None of them did. The fire was kept low, the windows covered. The storm passed just before dawn, but the air remained heavy, too still. At sunrise, Kellen rode out to the homestead with a posse of 2, young deputies with steady nerves and quicker hands. He walked through the ruined door, surveyed the damage, and said only, Well, hell. Amos told him everything. The letter, the bounty flyer, the break-in. Kellen listened, then nodded. I'll send word to the judge in Flat Creek, see if there's any record of this Beckett or contract. But I'll tell you now, that kind of paper don't hold in this county, not if it treats children like cattle. Amos looked out the window where Willa sat on the porch steps, eyes fixed on the trees. He'll come back. Then I'll come too. Before leaving, Kellen knelt in front of Willa. You remember anything about this Beckett fella? She shook her head. Mama never let me meet him, just said we were supposed to go west, that she owed someone, I think she ran, I think she lied to them. Kellen nodded. Sometimes lying is the only way to stay alive. But now they want me because of her. No, Kellen said gently. They want you because they're wicked, and we don't answer to wicked men here. The next 3 days were tense but uneventful. Ruth patched the door the best she could, nailing boards across it and hanging an old quilt to block the drafts. Amos spent most of his time outside, walking the perimeter, chopping wood even when they didn't need it, just to keep his hands moving. Willa tried to help, but she couldn't concentrate. Her drawings looked strange, all corners and claws. She started one of the cottonwood again but abandoned it halfway through, tearing the page out and crumpling it. Not everything has to be perfect, Ruth said, handing her a new sheet. But if I draw it wrong, it won't be real. Sweetheart, Ruth said gently, it's already real, we're here. That night, Willa spoke softly across the dinner table. Amos. He looked up. If he comes back, if he hurts you, it'll be my fault. No, it won't. But, Willa, his voice was firm, not harsh. Listen to me. You are not a burden. You are not a mistake. And you sure as heaven are not to blame for what evil men choose to do. Her chin trembled. Then why do they keep following me? Because light draws moths, and some moths burn the world just to feel warm. Ruth reached across the table and took Willa's hand. We don't blame you. We thank God you came. The second attack didn't come loud. It came silent. It came just before dawn on the 7th day, when the world was dim and colorless. Ruth was tending to the stove. Amos was in the barn. Willa had just opened the back door to empty the basin water when she saw the shape in the trees, too tall, too still. She froze. A glint of metal, a shadow moving. Then a hand grabbed her from behind. She kicked hard, the basin crashing against the steps. A man grunted, tried to cover her mouth. Willa bit down. He cursed, dropped her. She scrambled across the yard, screaming. Amos. Ruth turned just in time to see the man coming from the trees, another from the side of the barn. Amos came running. The rifle fired once, loud and sharp. One man dropped. The other fled. Kellen and his deputies arrived before noon. The dead man carried a knife and a locket. Inside was a sketch of a girl, not unlike Willa. The name Flynn was scrawled beneath it. A brother, maybe. The sheriff buried him at the edge of the property, no marker. That night Willa didn't eat. She sat at the window, knees pulled to her chest, watching the trees. I thought I was safe, she whispered. You are, Ruth said. No, safe means no one comes. Safe means I can sleep. I don't think I'll ever be safe. Amos came in from outside, dirt still on his hands. He knelt beside her. Do you want to run? No. Then don't, because we're not running either. You stay, we stay, that's the deal. What if more come? Then we stand again. Willa looked at him. How many times until you change your mind? Amos didn't blink. There's no number that breaks love. And Willa, for the first time, believed him. The next day, a letter arrived by courier. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. To the parties currently harboring Willa James. You have 30 days to present her at the estate of Judge Beckett in Crow's Hollow, Texas territory, to resolve the matter legally. Failure to do so will result in further action. Kellen read it twice. They're trying to make it seem proper, put a coat and tie on a kidnapping. What do we do? Ruth asked. Amos stared out the window. We go. They left before dawn on a Monday, the frost still fresh on the fence rails, a thin layer of ice sheeting the water trough. Ruth packed 3 loaves of hard bread, 2 jars of beans, dried apples wrapped in muslin, and a small tin of honey. Amos brought ammunition, a worn Bible and Isaac's old blanket. Willa brought her satchel, of course, but she also brought something she'd never thought she'd carry again, a sliver of trust. The wagon creaked under the weight of their caution. Amos drove, eyes steady on the trail ahead. Ruth sat beside him, wrapped in her heavy shawl, hands folded tight. Willa rode in back, nestled in quilts and between bundles, the shotgun within reach. The world outside was quiet, deceptively so, as if it too were waiting to see if this journey would end in deliverance or something darker. Kellen had offered an escort. Amos declined. 3 makes a family, he'd said. Anything more makes it look like a war. Still, Kellen pressed a folded note into Amos's hand before they left. Sheriff Prout in Crow's Hollow. Doesn't wear the badge like a costume. If you find trouble, find him. The trail south was slow and cold. They moved through quiet gullies and over dry riverbeds, the land turning meaner as the days passed. On the 3rd night they made camp in a narrow canyon, the fire low, the horses restless. Willa sat on a rock beside Ruth, watching the flames curl. Why are we doing this? She asked. Ruth stirred the embers gently. To finish what your mama started. I don't even know what she started. Maybe she didn't either, Amos said from the shadows. Sometimes people run not to find something, but to get far enough away they don't have to explain. Willa looked down. If this judge really owns me. He doesn't, Ruth said flatly. But what if the law says he does? Amos leaned forward. Then we show the law it's wrong. Crow's Hollow came into view on the 8th day, a dusty town etched into a basin of red rock and scrub. The streets were hard-packed earth, the buildings sun-warped and half-leaning. It was the kind of place people passed through, not to. But Judge Beckett had carved his estate into the edge of it like a monument to defiance, white columns and black shutters gleaming over a wide porch. A fence wrapped the entire property, and 2 armed men stood at its gate. They didn't stop the wagon when it passed, but their eyes followed with the precision of hawks. Amos guided the wagon into town proper and stopped near the sheriff's office. A single star hung crooked in the window. Inside, Sheriff Prout sat behind a desk, reading a ledger with one leg propped on a crate. He looked up when they entered and immediately stood. You Whitlock. Amos nodded. Kellen said you were coming, said you were dragging the devil into daylight. Ruth stepped forward. That man, Judge Beckett, he's claiming rights over a child. That can't be legal. Prout sighed and motioned to the bench. Depends what you mean by legal. Beckett's got land, power, and ink. Men like him don't just make deals, they archive them. He sent thugs to our door, twice, Amos said. I know the type, Prout said. He uses papers the way others use pistols. But truth is, if you challenge him straight on, you better have more than a wounded girl and good intentions. She's not wounded, Ruth said sharply. She's alive, and she's not alone anymore. Prout studied Willa, who stood by the door, chin up, but hands trembling at her sides. I believe you, he said, but in this town belief don't hold up in court. So what does? Amos asked. Proof, testimony, witnesses. If you can tie Beckett to threats, fraud, maybe even trafficking, you might have a chance. Amos reached into his coat and handed over the crumpled bounty flyer and both letters. Prout, read them carefully. This helps, but not enough. We'll need more. And if Beckett catches wind you're building a case, he'll move faster than justice. What do you suggest? Ruth asked. You stay at the church. No one'll touch you there without answering to something higher than law. Father Thomas was a soft-spoken man with sad eyes and a quiet strength. He didn't flinch when Amos explained the situation. He offered them one of the back rooms behind the chapel, just big enough for a bedroll and a basin. Willa stared up at the stained glass window above the altar, bright reds and blues forming an angel with a sword. "Will he protect me?" she asked Ruth as they laid out her bedding. "I believe he already has." Willa didn't argue. She simply nodded and sat cross-legged beneath the colored light. That night Amos returned to town alone. He found a man named Jonas Kern who used to ride with Beckett, used to collect debts. Word was he left after things got unclean. Amos waited outside the saloon, approached Kern with hands visible. "I ain't looking for trouble," he said, "just the truth." Kern laughed bitterly. "That's trouble where Beckett's concerned. He wants a child, claims ownership." Kern sobered. "Willa, you know her." "I knew her mama, Nora. She was forced into a labor contract to pay her brother's debt. She tried to break it when she got pregnant, said she'd raise the girl far from all this. Beckett sent Flynn after her." "Was there ever a real contract?" "Real enough on paper, but forged. No judge signed it. Beckett did it himself." Amos leaned forward. "Would you swear to that?" "Not without protection." "You'll have it." Kern nodded. "Then meet me at dawn, church steps. I'll bring what I have." But dawn came and Kern didn't. His body was found outside town, half buried near the creek, throat cut. A message was pinned to his shirt. "Next one dies slower." Prout called an emergency council hearing, but no one showed. The town was scared, the kind of scared that rotted the spine. Willa stood behind Ruth in the chapel doorway, watching the sheriff storm back across the square. "People don't care about truth here," she said. "They care," Ruth said gently, "but they care about safety more." "What if there's no such thing as safe?" Amos knelt in front of her. "Then we make it anyway." That night Amos and Prout forged a plan. If Beckett wanted to make this legal, they'd answer legally, but on their terms. They'd demand a hearing, public, witnessed, with Willa at the center, not the margins, and they'd hold it in the chapel, not the courthouse. "People still fear God," Prout said, "more than they fear judges." Beckett agreed too quickly. The hearing was set for 3 days later. On the morning of the hearing, the church filled faster than expected. Half the town came, many just to see if Beckett would finally lose. The judge arrived in a black carriage, boots polished, cane in hand. Flynn walked behind him, eyes scanning every corner like a wolf searching for a weakness. Willa sat between Ruth and Amos in the front pew. She wore a clean dress, hair braided, Bible clutched tight. Father Thomas opened with prayer, then Sheriff Prout stood. "We gather today not for trial but for truth. A man claims rights over a child. That child is here. Let the truth be spoken before God." Beckett rose. The child's mother entered into a contractual bond, signed and witnessed. That bond extended to any offspring. "The child is legally bound to my household as indenture until her 18th year." Prout raised the paper. "No such contract exists in our registry, and this document," he held up Beckett's, "bears your own signature on all lines. No judge, no court seal." Beckett's lips thinned. "It was notarized privately." "Then it's not enforceable here." Flynn stepped forward. "She's mine to claim." Willa stood. The room went still. "My name is Willa James," she said, voice clear. "My mama died trying to keep me from men like you. She told me to run. I did. And I found people who didn't treat me like a debt." She turned to the crowd. "Is that what children are now? Debts? Do I get weighed by how much I cost, or who I belong to?" No one answered. Willa stepped closer to the altar. "They buried a man last week who tried to help. Beckett's man killed him. That's what this is. Not law, power. Beckett stepped forward. That's slander. Then sue me, Willa said. But you won't win, not here, not anymore. The room erupted. People stood, some cheered, others gasped. Flynn reached for his coat too fast. Amos tackled him. The gun went off. Smoke filled the air. Screaming. Ruth pulled Willa down behind the pew. Pruitt fired once. Flynn dropped. Amos stood, bleeding from the arm but alive. Beckett froze, hands raised. It's over, Pruitt said. You're under arrest. The chapel quieted slowly, the sound of footsteps and startled breaths lingering like echoes of thunder. Flynn's body lay crumpled by the pulpit, a smear of blood darkening the wooden floor beneath him. Smoke still twisted through the high beams above, curling toward the stained-glass angel overhead like it, too, was trying to escape. Willa stayed huddled between Ruth and Amos, her hands pressed to her ears, her breath coming in quick, panicked bursts. Pruitt holstered his revolver slowly and turned to the crowd. No one else move, he said. This hearing's adjourned. Beckett stood stiffly, his hands still raised, his face a mask of composure stretched too thin. You'll regret this, he said, voice low and cold. Maybe, Pruitt replied, stepping forward, but you'll regret it first. He pulled Beckett's arms behind his back, cuffs clicking into place with a finality that echoed louder than the gunshot. Two deputies took the judge by the arms and led him from the chapel, the townsfolk parting in silence as he passed. Amos finally sat down, clutching his bleeding arm, his breath shallow but steady. Willa scrambled from behind the pew and dropped beside him. You're hurt, she said, her voice trembling. He reached for her hand. I've had worse. Ruth knelt beside them both, pressing a handkerchief to the wound. Flesh wound, she said, inspecting it. Went clean through. Willa tried not to cry, but the tears came anyway, silent, hot, falling faster the harder she tried to hold them back. You saved me, she whispered. Amos shook his head. We stood with you, that's what family does. She wrapped her arms around his neck, careful not to jostle his injury. He held her tightly, one arm around her back, the other hanging limp. Ruth placed a hand on both their shoulders and closed her eyes for a moment. Then she stood and faced the gathered crowd. You all saw what happened here today. That man, she pointed to Flynn, came for a child with a gun in his coat. The other man, her voice faltered only slightly, came with a paper he thought made him God. But this town, this church, this family, we answered them with truth. No one spoke, but heads began to nod. One by one, the townsfolk turned and walked out into the sunlight, the weight of fear slowly lifting from their shoulders. Later that afternoon, Father Thomas helped Ruth and Willa clean the chapel floor. Amos rested in the back room with his arm wrapped and his eyes closed, though sleep didn't come easy. Do you think it's really over? Willa asked as she scrubbed at a dark streak near the altar. Thomas knelt beside her. Trouble like that don't die easy, but it's weaker now, and so are the lies that carried it. Ruth squeezed out the rag and leaned back on her heels. We stood in the light. That counts for something. Willa looked up at the stained glass above. It was scary. Courage don't mean it's not scary, Ruth said gently. It just means you didn't let the fear decide. Willa nodded, her fingers tightening on the rag. Mama would have been proud. She would have, Ruth agreed. They worked in silence after that, a quiet sort of peace settling over the space like the dust that drifted through the golden light. Judge Beckett was held in the Crow's Hollow jailhouse pending a circuit court review, but news traveled fast. Word of his arrest spread beyond the basin, riders carrying tales of the hearing, of the child who'd stood at the altar and named her own worth, of the family that had refused to sell her back to the past. Some believed it, some didn't, but enough people listened that the danger began to recede. 2 weeks passed. The town calmed. The fear that had lived in Willa's eyes began to fade, replaced by something tentative but bright. One morning, as Amos sat on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee, Willa joined him barefoot, her hair loose over her shoulders. "Your arm still hurt?" she asked, leaning against the rail. "Not much. You going to wear that sling forever?" "Just until Ruth stops fussing." She smiled, then looked out at the street. "Do you think we'll go back soon?" Amos sipped his coffee. "We could. But do you want to?" He looked at her carefully. "Do you?" Willa didn't answer right away. "I like it here, the church, the porch, the way the town feels different now, but I miss the cottonwood tree." "I do too." She swung her legs. "We could plant one here." He raised an eyebrow. "You want to put down roots?" Willa shrugged. "Maybe if we're staying." Amos looked out at the morning sun climbing slow over the hills. "Let's see what the soil says." That afternoon, Ruth found a nursery at the edge of town. They didn't have cottonwoods, but they had young oaks, and one sapling with a twist in its trunk that reminded her of Isaac's drawing hand, always crooked, always stubborn. She brought it home wrapped in burlap. Willa named it Mercy. They planted it near the church steps, where the sun would hit it at dawn and the chapel bells would ring over its leaves. Willa pressed her hands into the dirt as they covered the roots, whispering something Ruth didn't quite catch. "What'd you say?" she asked. "I told it to grow brave." A letter arrived 5 days later. It was from Sheriff Kellen Hart. "Heard what happened. Proud of you. County judge up north dismissed Beckett's papers as fraudulent. There's no legal claim. The girl is free, permanently." Ruth read the letter aloud. Willa stared at the last line for a long time. "Free," she whispered. The next morning, she untied her satchel for the first time in months. She took out the old Bounty flyer, the name Jonah Price written in her mother's handwriting. She folded it once, then again, and tossed it into the fire. Then she looked at the Bible, its spine soft and faded. But the next day, signs returned. The first was a missing rooster, no feathers, no tracks, just gone. Then a broken fence post at the edge of the property. Amos thought little of it at first, stray dog weather. But when the chapel bell rope was found cut clean through the next morning, he didn't wait. He went straight to Prude. "You think Beckett's hired new men?" he asked. Prude nodded grimly. "Word is he's embarrassed, cornered, and dangerous. That hearing humiliated him. He's not used to being beaten in public. He's not after her anymore. He's after revenge." Prude leaned back in his chair. "Then we build a wall he can't climb. If he comes, he'll find this town isn't afraid of him anymore." But not all the town agreed. By week's end, a rumor spread that harboring Willa had invited danger, that keeping her might bring the wrath of more men with guns and papers. Some folk turned their eyes away again. Some no longer waved as the three passed in the street. Willa noticed. "They think I'm the problem again," she said softly one evening. "No," Ruth answered. "They're just remembering their old fear. Doesn't mean they're right." "But what if it never stops? What if there's always someone chasing me?" Amos set down his fork, looked across the table. "Then we keep standing, until they realize they can't take what isn't theirs." "But what if I'm not worth all this?" Amos's eyes didn't blink. "Then why are we still here?" Willa swallowed hard. "What if something happens to you? Then you keep going, and you carry us with you." That night lightning split the horizon. A dry storm, all flash and no rain. The air felt charged. Willa couldn't sleep. She wandered down into the chapel, barefoot, the floor cool beneath her toes. The broken bell rope had been coiled neatly in a basket beside the altar, as if someone had planned to mend it but couldn't bring themselves to try yet. She stared at the rope, then at the bell above, its silent mouth yawning in the rafters. She stood beneath it and whispered, "Please ring for me, just once, just so I know I still matter." The bell didn't move, but the door creaked behind her. She spun. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the lightning. His face was thin, his eyes sunken. He didn't wear a gun, but danger clung to him like smoke. "You're Willa," he said. She backed away. "Who are you?" "Someone who made a mistake. I used to ride with Beckett. I helped find your mother once." Willa froze. "You're lying." "I wish I were." He stepped forward slowly. "But I left. I've been running ever since. She told me to tell you something." "My mother's dead." "I know." He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded note. "But before she died, she made me swear, if I ever saw you again, I was to give you this." Willa didn't take it. So he set it on the nearest pew and turned to leave. "She loved you," he said. "She died trying to keep you free." Then he disappeared into the storm. Willa picked up the note with shaking hands. It was short, just a few lines written in her mother's looping scrawl. "I'm sorry I was afraid. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. But if you find good people, real ones stay. Love them, let them love you. That's how you win. Not by hiding, but by hoping." She folded the note and held it to her chest, tears slipping free. Then she climbed the bell tower. The rope was still cut, but she reached for the clapper itself, leaning through the hatch, grabbing tight with both hands. She pulled hard. The bell rang. Once. Twice. The sound rolled through the town like thunder. Amos and Ruth bolted upright. Others emerged from their homes. Lights flicked on, doors opened. The chapel bell kept ringing, wild and uneven, but insistent. "Alive!" At the top of the tower, Willa shouted into the wind. "I'm not running anymore." By morning, the town had gathered. Father Thomas opened the chapel doors and let them all in. Willa stood before them, her mother's note now folded into her Bible. "She ran," she told them, "but I won't. I won't ask you to fight for me, but I'll fight for me, and if you'll stand beside me, I'll never forget it." A silence. Then the old storekeeper stepped forward. "Girl rang that bell when no one else dared." Then another. She made the judge flinch. And another. "She's ours now, let them come." By sundown, half the town had fortified the chapel. The rest had taken positions in the streets. Amos stood beside Willa at the front steps. "Whatever happens next," he said, "we're ready." Willa nodded. "I believe you." And she did. The final day dawned gray and wide, the kind of morning that didn't pretend to offer peace. The sun stayed hidden behind a low veil of clouds, and the air carried a hush so complete, even the birds seemed to hold their songs. It had been 5 days since the bell rang out over Crow's Hollow, and though there'd been no sign of Beckett's men, no rider scouts on the ridge, no distant hoofbeats in the night, everyone felt the same thing pressing down on them. A silence stretched too tight, like the still before a rifle shot. Willa woke early. She dressed without a word, tied her boots tight, and slipped out to the porch where Amos already sat with a mug of coffee in hand. Ruth was nearby, kneeling by a bucket of fresh-picked beans, fingers working absently through the rinse. "You didn't sleep," Willa said. Amos smiled faintly. "Did you?" "Some." Ruth looked up. "Pastor S. making stew for everyone today. He said if this is to be a stand, we ought to do it on full stomachs." Willa's eyes drifted across the quiet street. "Do you think he'll come today?" Amos didn't answer right away. He took a long sip of coffee, then set the mug down slowly. "If he doesn't, it'll be because he's waiting for us to forget." "I won't," Willa said, "even if everyone else does." They spent the morning preparing. Ruth packed bandages. Amos checked and rechecked the rifle he'd taken from the church. Willa sharpened 2 paring knives and tucked them into her belt, though she wasn't entirely sure she'd use them. It wasn't about hurting anyone. It was about not being helpless again, about standing when it mattered. By noon, the square was lined with men and women, farmers, blacksmiths, storekeepers, mothers with babies on their hips. Father Thomas stood at the chapel steps, Bible in hand, his other hand resting on the hilt of a pistol holstered under his cassock. The bell tower above stood unmanned for now, its rope repaired and tied to a cleat waiting. Willa stood beside him, flanked by Amos and Ruth. Sheriff Prout paced slowly in front of the gathered crowd, his boots dragging just enough to kick dust but not enough to make it rise. His shotgun rested loosely in his hands, but his eyes were sharp and constantly moving. "Word came through the trader line," he said aloud. "Beckett's men are riding, 10 strong, 1 wagon, 2 rifles, might be 20 minutes out." A low murmur passed through the crowd. Willa clenched her fists. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, though her voice trembled. Amos knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "Being afraid isn't the point, Willa. Staying anyway is." The crowd shifted as the distant sound of hooves began to echo off the canyon wall. Dust rose on the far trail, slow at first, then faster. The wagons weren't running in hard, but they weren't hiding either. It was a parade of pride, a show of confidence, the kind of entrance men made when they didn't believe they'd meet resistance. Willa stepped forward until she was clear of the crowd. Prout held up a hand to stop her, but she shook her head. "They came for me," she said. "Let them see I'm not hiding." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. The wagon stopped 20 yards from the edge of the square. 10 riders fanned out behind it, rifles slung lazily, hands near hilts but not drawn. And from the wagon stepped Judge Myron Beckett. He wore the same black coat and cane, the same slick hair, the same disdainful smirk. But this time it didn't land quite so confidently. This time he was the one looking up at a town no longer bowing. "Chapel's not a courthouse," he called. "This gathering's not legal." "Then why'd you bring lawyers?" Amos replied from behind Willa. "I came for what's mine." "She's not yours." Beckett's eyes landed on Willa. "You've caused quite the mess, girl. Got good men killed. Turned good people against the law. That's a lot of weight to carry for someone so young." "I carried worse," Willa said, "and I survived." A flicker of something dark crossed his face. He stepped forward. 1 pace, then another. That's when the bell rang. Once loud and sharp. It wasn't from the tower. It was from inside the chapel itself, where Ruth had hung a smaller iron bell from the pulpit, Willa's idea. A second signal, a warning. The moment it rang, the townsfolk raised their weapons, not to shoot but to stand, to say enough. Beckett's men shifted, uneasy now. Prout stepped forward, leveling his shotgun with precision. "You take 1 more step, Beckett, and I'll drag you back to that jail in chains, or I'll bury you here. Your choice." Beckett stopped. "You think this ends it?" he asked. "I think you already lost," Ruth said. He looked at Willa. "You'll never be safe." She stepped forward. "Maybe not, but I won't be silent." He stared at her a moment longer, then turned. "Mount up," he barked. The riders obeyed. Within minutes the trail was dust again, and the square silent. Not in fear, but in peace. Later that day, Willa sat on the chapel steps, a sketchpad in her lap. She drew the street, not just buildings but people, faces, smiles, Ruth at the garden stall, Amos speaking with the sheriff, a child playing near the water trough. Father Thomas sat beside her. "Why the smiles?" he asked. "Because that's what it looked like," she said. "Not the fear, not the guns, the part that stayed." He nodded. "You've given this town something they didn't know they needed." "What's that?" "A reason to stand for something again." She kept drawing. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I think we'll go back soon," she said. "Back home, plant something, fix the porch." "Will you come back?" Willa smiled. "This place will always have my roots, but my branches." "Need the sun," Thomas finished. She looked up. Exactly. 1 week later, they returned. The ride home was quiet. Mercy, the young oak they planted, swayed gently in the chapel yard as they passed, its leaves catching the last gold of dusk. The homestead hadn't changed much in their absence. The porch creaked the same. The cottonwood still stood, tall and silent beside the house, but something inside the house felt different. Alive. That evening, Ruth made cornbread and stew. Amos sat in his chair by the fire, Willa across from him with her feet tucked beneath her. She stared into the flames. What if someone else comes someday? What if new papers show up? Amos sipped his tea. Then we do what we've done. She looked at Ruth. We stay, Ruth said softly. We keep showing up. That's what love is, Willa, not the part that runs, the part that stays even when it's hard. Willa nodded slowly. Then she stood, went to her satchel and took something out, a small journal she'd bought with Ruth back in Crow's Hollow. She opened it, turned to the first blank page and began to write. My name is Willa James Whitlock. This is the story of how I stopped being afraid, of how I found a place to belong, a porch that didn't creak from emptiness, a tree that remembered me, a family that stayed. Outside, the wind curled gently through the fields. The cottonwood whispered, and Willa slept through the night without waking.